All right, I think we're live. Hello, everyone. Um, let's take a look at the agenda. We got Istanbul EIPs for the first part. Um, we have client implementation updates for accepted and tentatively accepted. Um, so let's just go through the clients that are on the call, and they can kind of just say if they're running into any roadblocks other than the tentatively accepted EIPs that we don't have all the information for, and just kind of where they're at. So let's start with is anyone from Parity here? I don't think so. Let's start with Nethermind.
Hi. So I just added the tracker to the issue that was created for agenda. We've just implemented the chain ID so far. I was looking at the other ones. I think 3 or 4 remaining ones, the accepted and tentative, should be pretty straightforward. For reducing alt BN 128, we'll check our implementation. The cost change itself is okay, but we would like to run some benchmarks on our current implementation and see if we have to write any bindings for the libraries. As for Blake 2, should be no problem. So yeah, I'm pretty positive. There will be a question about the proc pow and the AC arithmetic. So the probably Istanbul 2, I think that's on the list. This might be a bit more work, but I'm also quite confident about it.
Okay, great. Geth.
Peter, you want to go ahead?
Oh yeah, Peter, you're muted if you're talking.
Yes, sorry, a touchscreen keyboard appeared above the mute button and I couldn't press it. So sorry about it. Yeah, so as for Geth, I think so regarding accepted EIPs and tentative EIPs, I think during the last core dev call, there was a bit of confusion because we kind of split Istanbul into two. One of them that we can actually ship within weeks, and there were two really big EIPs that would be really nice to have, but require some stuff that cannot be done within the 2 or 3 weeks time span. So I think it probably throughout the call it would help to always know whether we're talking about Istanbul 1 or Istanbul 2. So if we're talking about Istanbul 1, I mean the one that we're going to do in however many weeks on the testnet, there essentially we have, I think we had 4 accepted EIPs and maybe 2 tentative ones. For us, most of them are already merged in. There are two EIPs that are not yet merged in. One of them was the 2200. That was essentially a NIC's net gas metering EIP. And while there were two ideas on how to approach it. There was the original one, I think, proposed by Wei, and there was Alexi's version. And on Thursday, we implemented Alexi's version and spec'd it out just to see how that would work because there was no spec for it. But realistically, I don't think that works. So some problems were kind of discovered. And I think everybody agrees that we should go with Wei's version. So the current actual spec of 2200. So that one we still have to implement, but it's fairly trivial. And the other thing is Blake 2. We haven't implemented yet because there were some minor back and forths with the EIP. So for that one, it would be really nice to know whether the EIP is final and all details are done. I don't think it's hard to implement, but it's kind of a moving target now. Yeah, so that's about it for Istanbul 1. So we have our tracker, so it's mostly done. As for Istanbul 2, essentially ProcPow and EC arithmetics, honestly, I haven't looked at those because we decided that those will not make it in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, we don't need to worry about Istanbul 2 right now. I should have said Istanbul 1. So yeah,
But
if that's all.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Martin.
Why we're on? I don't see on the agenda anywhere if we can on today's call actually move the tentative ones to accepted? Can we have that discussion sometime?
Yeah, so I kind of agree with Martin that on today's agenda there's this item to pick a block number, but I mean first we actually need to pick the set of EIPs that go in. So it would be nice.
Yeah, that might be something better to do on the Core Devs Getter channel once we see how wieldy the EIPs that go from tentative to accepted are, and so we can see if it's possible to have a.
It's only
Oh,
two
go
of
ahead.
them. It's only two of them that we need to decide on.
And a lot of that's partially coded, right?
Yes. So one is trivial,
Okay.
repricing. The other one, rebalancing, should be trivial because everyone already implemented it once.
So essentially the rebalance in the net gas metering stuff is exactly Nick's version, just has one more clause in it. So I mean, you just need to add one more line to the code. And
Okay.
and the repricing EIP is just changing the price of the gas price of 3 operations, I think.
Yeah, and adding one trivial opcode.
Just wanted to note that Parity mentioned that they didn't think that the EAP 2200 as is would be ready, would be able to go, they'd be able to go through a security audit by this Istanbul launch.
No,
No.
that's not what it said.
So as far as I understand what they said on the PM call is that there were two versions for that. There was waivers version that is ready and that we've been going with that for since forever. And there was Alexi's proposal from last week and that one's problematic. But I also said that one's problematic. So there's no point in going with that one.
So yeah, to clarify.
Okay, so
Way
yeah, go ahead and
still,
clarify.
Way is still backing his own EAP, the one that's been proposed forever, and we are also, and Pavel also. Well, he doesn't oppose it. Really. I mean, I think it's fine with either.
So it sounds like Parity, Geth, Aleth, everyone's on the, or those three are at least on the same page for no one shooting down Way's version, right?
Yes.
Pantheon likes it
I'm
too.
not putting words into Pavel's mouth here, but that's my understanding. Yes.
Okay. Nethermind, Trinity, are y'all good with that?
No objection from Trinity.
No objections.
Okay, great. Am I missing a client here? I felt like I might be. I guess Ethereum JS, if Axic is still working on that one. I don't know where you're at on that, or within that team, if you're actively working on that, or if you're just EWASM.
Yeah, I can't really give a proper update on JS. I wasn't following it.
Okay, no problem. Well, sounds like we're good to go on that one then. So does that takes out one of the two ones that were tentative that need to be moved to final? Am I correct there?
Yes.
Wonderful.
So and the one remaining is 1884.
Okay, and can someone give like an overview of where we're at on there? Since I've been gone for 2 or 3 weeks, I can't.
So with regard to 1884, so repricing certain opcodes, I think essentially that EIP was scheduled for discussion on all core dev calls since for half a year now. And every time it was postponed simply because it was a trivial EIP and it was like, yeah, okay, so we didn't get to it, but yeah, we'll just cover it in the next core dev call.
And no one kind of ever raised points about it except for the obvious things that hey, if you do this it might change the behavior. Obviously.
Okay, so it looks like 30 minutes ago Paul commented on it and kind of gave a nice overview of it in the agenda. Yeah, the
We're
S
talking
store
about
from 2300 to 1600. I couldn't
no,
But that
no,
grasp exactly.
that's rebalance. That's 2200.
Got it. Someone did, I thought someone did benchmarks for the call data decrease.
We're not talking about the call data decrease though. We're talking about the
Oh wow,
reprice.
I'm very lost then.
We're talking about basically repricing S load and
S load.
yes, and also
I think that 1894, with all the data that we have from Martin on his spec, is so not controversial that it can very easily go straight in. Does anyone else think that there is any problem? Because it actually increases the prices than decreasing them. So
thank
I'm
you.
cool with it.
Yeah, is there any objection to that? It seems like it's straightforward.
Yeah, ship it.
Or I'm on the meta and it looks straightforward.
the only potential risks, if someone assumed that the stipend 2.3 thousand will be enough for some operations, and after the change it will not be enough anymore. So maybe some contracts that will be accepting transfers will not be able to make calls that they were doing before.
Yeah, I mean that can happen. Yes, but it's not really sustainable to have um, that cheap price on such an expensive operation. So it's a kind of tough choice between having an unsustainable pricing or potentially break things, but make it more sustainable going forward. Because this problem is not going away. We're gonna have to rebalance it later on, unless we manage to do some state clearing.
I'm okay with it. It just would be great to maybe to point at the potential problem to people so they can review the contracts and that they are aware of the change a bit more, that it can affect them in this particular way. Just because we understand it can affect them this way and they may not be aware of it.
We've changed the price on this twice before.
Yeah, I at least when I was doing more stuff with smart contracts and I would talk to people about it, there was kind of widely known that it's not going to, these gas prices and stuff like that are not going to stay the same forever, depending on if things happen like the attacks in Shanghai or if there's like more efficient ways and like
Yeah,
things we can do to change it to make it better. So I think people would be okay with it personally.
I think that it's probably not a big issue that when you get 2300, uh, but yeah, you may not fail with calls because if you're doing calls, you probably, uh, I mean, those calls can't be state changing anyway. Uh, but it might be that you want to do a log with something from your slots, from your storage, and that might fail. I think that is probably a more common scenario that you get a call or ether send or whatever, uh, and you don't have sufficient gas to load a value and log it out.
I think it would be great to move it to accepted and just see if someone can run the analysis on the contracts, on the existing contracts, and raise potential concerns if any of those would fail now.
Even if you do that, even if we find some, what would be a threshold for not doing it? Would it just be finding a lot of contracts or?
Yeah, and that's the thing. For me, I don't think there would be any such threshold really, uh, because we can't just, hey, there's a wall coming up, just keep running towards it. I mean, we need to actually raise this output. That's my take.
Okay. Um, Anyone else have opinions they want to discuss about this or um, opposition to this. It sounds like majority of people are fine just moving this to accepted, barring any major security stuff that shouldn't come up at all. Okay. Um, I think we're good then. Tomas, were you the one mentioning the analysis of it?
Yes, as we had it with 1283, now 2200. I think just this analysis of the existing contracts stopped us from releasing during Constantinople and allowed us to make improvements. So maybe the same tools that were used at that time can be run with the analysis of the expectation for the stipends to be enough for the calls to load. I'm not really expecting any significant contracts to experience that issue. Whether like what you call significant contract, it's a bit of political things.
Yeah, that just sounds like what that sounds like is that we would be doing something to then have more discussion when we're pretty sure that we're not going to find anything major and that the edict from the beginning of Ethereum has kind of been these things can change in the first place. So if you're a contract developer, you should have been prepared for that. And that we've repriced this before and not run into any major opposition after the fact. I think are all signs that it doesn't necessarily need to be benchmarked in a way that would cause us to use resources for that.
That's why I was suggesting to raise it with community, so we can potentially expect the community to run something if their awareness is there that this may happen.
I
Yeah,
think that's a great idea. And I think what we can have the cat herders just like do like a sweep on social media to announce that this is happening and that could be effective for letting contracts know ahead of time. So if there is a major pushback, we can reconsider. Does that sound good?
yeah, that's what I meant really.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so we're going to accept it with that one. Any other comments or questions? All right, great. So we've dealt with the two tentative ones for Istanbul 1. Um, the next thing on the list, which I'm not able to find previous things about, is benchmarks for gas repricing EIPs. Did we already go over that, or is there other ones?
No, so that's why I was saying that there's some confusion between Istanbul 1 and Istanbul 2, because last call there was a lot of talk about stuff to add to Istanbul 2, and there are all kinds of gas repricing things. So those are all for Istanbul 2.
Okay, we don't need to necessarily go over that today since there are more important things. If we want to bring it up at the end, I think that would be okay. Does everyone agree?
Agreed.
Yeah, so I would try to close down Istanbul 1, and then however much time we have, we can continue discussing the IPs. So
Mm-hmm. Um, Number two, conformance testing. That's usually in Dimitri's court, right? Or is conformance testing referencing something else that I wasn't aware of?
I think it's talking about Dimitri's reference tests.
Okay. So I talked to Dimitri recently, and he had concerns that a lot of um, the testing, I guess, load is on him, and that he thinks in the future or even right now that clients should be using retest to create test cases for their EIPs, like the EIP champions or the clients implementing. I would need to go back and look exactly at what was said, and I wish he was here to speak on this. Maybe he'll be here next meeting. But basically, if there can be more clients making test cases, that would help a lot, and that he would be able to be kind of a coordinator of that and also write test cases um, while still not having an incredible amount of things he has to write on his own.
Yeah, I have actually been writing test cases using Geth as the filler, transaction tests for 2028, and also tests for chain ID opcode, and tests for my own repricing of and self balance. And those I've posted already in the All Core Dev Gitter channel. It'd be great if some other client can try out the tests and see, well, basically, so I know if they're correctly generated syntactically, and also if they seem to actually pass the test. So we know that we have a couple of clients that act the same. I hope to get the tests merged into the official test repository, and also make, right now the fillers are on a Geth fork of mine. They're not actually really up. Yeah, it's not easy to run them if you don't know what you're doing. But I'm gonna turn it into binary. I thought, that anyone can run. So there are more options other than, because the other option is use retest these, and in my opinion there are some drawbacks to that. Yeah, so I wanted to try doing it on natively in Geth.
And I wanted to point out there are two resources for everyone who might not be familiar with testing. There is the Gitter channel for Ethereum tests that I know Dimitri and others are pretty active in. And then there is also the Retestdeath wiki for creating state test with Retestdeath. I posted both those links in the Zoom. And I think that that would be helpful for people wanting to write these test cases and hopefully get more participation there. Did anyone else have comments on this?
Yes.
Yeah,
Were you speaking, James?
Yeah, I was gonna say, my understanding is that last week the decision was that authors, like it is on the EIP authors for the champions to make sure testing's happening for their EIP, but then with the understanding that since this is kind of the beginning, that we need to iron out what that process looks like. And I've been working with the Blake 2B guys, and I think Luis is on from 2028. There still is just a little bit of unclarity of how they can go through that process, even the ones that are willing to own it themselves. So I think that's just a matter of getting Dimitri and some resources, and something I'm happy to help Dimitri with, get kind of those pieces together.
Yeah. Regarding that, so one thing I know it's real pain in the ass to set everything up from scratch and actually generate the test. But one thing that EAP champions can do is to outline clearly, these are the things that need to be tested. Like for 2028, we need to test the transaction with this data. It should be this cost. We need to test it with the exact cost, and we need to test it with one below and see that, so we get the calculation right. And if there are any other quirky things, I don't think there are with 2028, but just textual description of what should be tested, that's a really good step, even if you don't go the whole run test ETH and write the JSON and stuff. That's a really good start.
So Pantheon, we just implemented retest support with our most recent release. And I've been working on writing some new tests. I've been trying to get Blake 2B. It's been a moving target, so I'm not ready to finalize the test that I submitted into the published a PR for. And I also, was on a call with Lewis from Starkware as well, trying to get a 2028 up and working. But I totally agree with Dimitri that we should move towards something like retested so that all the clients can support it and all the clients can work on it. So that way, when the EIP proposers start writing their first reference implementation, they have their choice of language of how they want to implement it. And it's a lot easier for them to then create conformance tests off of what they think their first correct implementation is. So yeah, I totally agree that retest eth is an amazing evolution of the existing test eth framework.
So,
All right, any other comments?
yeah, I'm just gonna add because I'm so Louis for 2028. I we as Ewan said, we try to come in and help and understand how thing goes, and there was, as we discussed, there was some confusion on the process itself, and I think it would be very helpful if the core dev could lay out a framework for to like reference to like to who we need to talk to, how we can help, and not only for our EIP but in general. I think it would be very helpful for the future. Maybe have a call with the champions themselves, with Dimitri or whoever is in charge of coordinating the effort to run the testing.
Yeah, and
So-
that's kind of, it would be nice if we have a hard fork coordinator. That would be a good point of contact for them.
Yeah, I think that would be good for now because we don't have that. Dimitri's going to be the best point of contact for handling retest death and the framework for testing that you're referring to, Louise. So on the Zoom chat, I have the two links. The wiki is not very thorough, but it'll be somewhat of a starting point. And then if you go into the Gitter channel for test, you can reach out to Dimitri and ask for a one-on-one, and I'm sure he'll be happy to do it.
Terrific, would do. Already, I'm already on the guitar. I just had a question for Martin because he replied and I didn't understand what he meant. I saw what you published around 2028, and I'm not sure how it relates to retest if.
Oh, it doesn't. So there are a specific subset of tests which are called transaction tests, and they're semantically different from state tests. And with 2028, we don't really need state tests for them because we can use transaction tests, at least for clients that implement transaction tests. Yeah, so that's what I meant. Because to validate the transaction, we don't need the full state. We just need the transaction.
Okay, so to just in this case, I'm going to narrow the question to 2028. Do we have now anything? Do we need to do something for the testing?
I would say not.
Okay, great.
So just to add a bit, I think with regard to testing, we have kind of two things that need to be done. So yes, Dimitri or somebody needs to implement the test cases, but I do think that somebody also needs to dream up those test cases. And for example, that, in my opinion, currently most of the EIPs have an empty slot for test cases. So the test cases actually is kind of empty. And I know that Andre, I think Gumbo from Eleth, he made a really nice table for the net gas metering EIP. And that is, of course, not enough to do cross-client testing, but it is enough for client developers to individually hack together whatever unit test in their preferred programming language to actually test that it works. And I think that would really be a very important help from EIP authors to just have test cases, even if it's just a table that, okay, this is the input. I don't know, it's an input for the EVM or the input for transaction or the input for whatever. And this is what we expect to happen. Because if we have that, then that's already a very good baseline check, sanity check to make sure that the implementation seems to work. And of course, on top of that, we can do cross-client testing and all kinds of other stuff, but it would really, really help to have some fairly conclusive test cases in the EIP, even if just in table form.
Okay, any other questions about that or anything else with this topic?
So just, yeah, I
Okay,
will add one more statement. For example,
sure.
just if we are looking at the context of EIP 2028, the call data repricing, it would be really nice if the EIP itself would have a test where it says that this is the transaction RLP, this one should cost N gas. And that would already be a very good sanity check, because then I could just implement that in Go and I would see whether I implemented the EIP correctly or not.
Isn't what Martin made, I mean, already did? I understood from what he just said.
Yeah, I think that the only thing that we need is this one example in the EIP description.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so even though it might already be created, if you have it in the EIP and just do a PR that has that example, that'll complete the EIP from a specific or a, I guess, formal perspective.
So okay, so in that case, we can make that happen. I'm going to coordinate to discuss with Martin offline to understand exactly the existing reference vector and implement that in the core, like in the text itself of the proposal.
Great. Okay, so next we have testnet upgrade in Istanbul next steps. So the block number for the September 4th testnet. By the way, how was September 4th decided since I wasn't here?
Yeah, so that one I think is still a bit in the air. Originally, I think the original fork time for Istanbul was 2 days ago for the testnet. And about two core dev calls ago, I flat out stated that that is not reasonable because we don't have a final list of EIPs. And so I asked people to push it out by, I don't know, a few weeks. But honestly, September the 4th is again about 2 weeks from now. And given that we just finalized the EIPs, it seems a bit reckless to me to pick a block number now without knowing whether Parity will finish implementing or whichever client will finish implementing the stuff in time. So I'm just thinking that with previous hard forks, after everybody implemented, we had literally months of testing period before rolling out to the testnet. And now we just came up with the final list of EIPs and we want to fork in 2 weeks. That's a bit brave.
Yeah, I agree. So in that case, let's just scrap that date. And since we won't be able to think of another date, I mean, I'm assuming we shouldn't think of another date today until we get more information on how quickly all the clients are implementing the EIPs. That we should, at the earliest next meeting, decide. But yeah, just kind of leave it at that for today's meeting. Anyone have any opposition to that or a different idea or anything?
Well, not really opposition, maybe a bit of a note is that if we just say that, okay, we're going to wait until everybody implements it, then and we don't care about any timelines, then we kind of run the risk of the whole thing getting delayed quite a lot. If there's no motivation for clients to actually implement it. So I would still try to somehow figure out a target that, okay, for the next all core dev call, I don't know when that will be, all the clients should have everything implemented. So even though we don't have a block number, we should have more or less a deadline for clients to do the thing.
Okay, does anyone have a proposed deadline, a date for client implementation of the EIPs, since we now have a complete list?
Well, I would say by the next core dev call, definitely.
Okay.
So do you want to the question: will the next quarter call be in 2 weeks?
We can do what we want. Since that would make sense if we want to give it 2 weeks, for that deadline to happen. But did you just mention 1 week or 2 weeks for people to implement? I forgot what you had mentioned.
I haven't mentioned it. That's why I'm asking whether. So I'm curious whether giving a 1 week deadline is doable, or whether we should be a bit nicer and do a 2 week deadline.
I lean toward 2 weeks so people don't feel rushed, personally.
I would aim for 1 week, unless someone opposes. I mean, unless someone speaks up. I think it's high time for us to feel a bit rushed and a bit stressed.
Okay. Any other opinions?
Yeah, if we were going to say more than 1 week, then we're at serious risk for not hitting our mainnet release date, I would say. And which probably requires external communication if we think we're not going to hit that.
I think 1 week is reasonable from our point of view. So this list of 6 EIPs that we have is not really demanding many minor changes. Blake 2, it's only connecting some libraries, so it should be fine.
Okay, let's say 1 week. That sounds good to me. And let's see, as far as the testnet block number and the the testnet block number, I don't know. What are people's opinions?
No, my opinion. Sorry, go on.
Would that be a good thing to say? Let's decide in a week, or let's decide in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So if we go with a 1 week deadline to implement it, I would say that okay, let's have an all quarter call next Friday and pick the block number then based on wherever people are or teams are.
Yeah, something like we could do that. We could also have instead of a full call, depending on how much we really need to get done besides picking a block number, we could just do it over Gitter. Let's see.
In theory, yes, but we will have enough participation? So I don't know how many people are generally regularly on Gitter.
How about we propose
That's a good
call and cancel it if we think we can get away with Gitter, but propose the call now?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. We'll do a call in 1 week. Okay, and that call will primarily, our number one agenda item for that call will be deciding the block for the testnet fork. And we can also deal with some stuff around naming and the second part of Istanbul, or whatever that might get renamed to, and things like that. So, and we've already agreed to split Istanbul into 2 forks, it looks like, or just create a second fork that has other stuff but not calling it Istanbul 2.
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether you got all the memos on the split, but essentially the reason why we originally proposed the split was because there were 2 big EIPs that are really nice. One of them is ProcPow, and the other one is the fancy elliptic curve precompiles. And the problem with both of these were that they are kind of done. They are kind of almost ready to be used, but they need some work that we don't know when it will happen. For ProcPow, we need a security audit to be completed, which will be done whenever. And for EC arithmetics, there are still some back and forth on the EIPs. And then the reason why we chose to do a second Istanbul hard fork was because we really would like to get these in, but they definitely won't make Istanbul. And but if we say that, okay, these get dropped out of Istanbul, and then after we do the Istanbul hard fork, we start planning the next one fully publicly, whatever, whenever. Then we kind of run the risk of essentially delaying these two for maybe another year or half a year or whatever. And then the idea was that after Istanbul is done, all teams should kind of focus on getting these two pushed through. And then during the last quarter call, for some reason, 6 more EIPs got pushed into this bucket. I guess it's fine-ish, we can discuss it. But the point with Istanbul 2 was to not make it a public EIP where more stuff can be suggested, rather to cherry pick anything that that was aimed for Istanbul but didn't make it due to not being fully completed.
Okay, thanks. That's a great explanation. And okay, I think I'm fully up to speed now. I just posted a link for the ProgPow audit GitHub page where we put the cat herders put some of the timelines and some of the scope for the audits. So if y'all want to check that out, basically the final audit report should be delivered by September 11th is the plan from least authority. The hardware audit report should be around the same time. It'll kind of that one's still a little more up in the air. Okay, so with that, and fully understanding the second Istanbul fork, was there any other comments?
At what point should we discuss Martin's pooled or staged fork model? At the end of this meeting or during the next meeting?
Let's do it during this if we have the time. I kind of just browsed that briefly and it looked really cool. The other thing that was requested was AXIC talking about the naming and the ETH Magicians forum post that they did for the naming. So I think that's something we have enough time to get to both of those, I think, before the meeting's done. So which one should we do first? Let's do the timing one first from Martin. So Martin, if you want to just give a brief overview of that, and then if everyone goes to the All Core Devs Getter, James made a really cool diagram about it. It looks like, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm guessing well, everyone is already familiar with it. The idea being to make the process a bit simpler for everyone, so we don't have to rush to get things in. Right now, we get kind of into a race. We accept a number of EAPs, and we hope to get everything ready by a certain time. And my proposal is to change it. We accept the EAP and say that yes, we think this will be good, and we think it's if this comes in the shape of PR, we are ready to actually include it in the clients, and everything is fine. And then the other people or those who have an interest in it push it through with the PRs. They make the testing happen, and once they think that they are complete with all of that, they tell the core dev channel, hey, everything is done. We have it in these 4 clients. We have the reference tests, and the clients pass the tests. And all the core devs has to do at that point is to say, okay, so let's schedule it for whenever. And that's that. Call it EAP-centric.
So I guess the difference that you would do now is that currently what we do is we accept the EIP, schedule it, and then start implementing it. And you would say that no, we would need cross-client implementations first before even scheduling it into a fork.
Yes, exactly. So we
That's what I like. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying. We wouldn't be racing against some artificial deadline, but instead let things take the time they take.
Dano, did you have a comment?
Yeah, my internet was going unstable, but now I'm back. What I like about this model from the way we've been doing it before is EIPs are accepted and they progress as they're ready, versus before they would be accepted for a particular EIP, and if they fail, then they're back to the beginning. So this way we move it through as they're ready, and then when things are ready, we pick it up and go. I think that is the major change of perspective we need on this.
And my favorite part about it is that every EIP that isn't even in Istanbul right now would know what their next step is in getting their EIP net, and that those steps can happen outside of waiting for all core dev calls to talk about them, because that's been one of my observations is like there's just a lot of waiting around that's not really necessary.
Excellent. My main concern, everything looks great on this. I love it, but this seems like it would cause more rapid and more, like basically more rapid and more hard forks in general, which I feel like would put a lot of people who run Ethereum client software like having to rush to keep up with this stuff. So yeah, that's kind of a concern.
I don't think this model actually wants to make forks more frequent. So you wouldn't fork for every EIP when it's ready. Rather, essentially all the EIPs would progress individually into this ready state, and then whenever you pick that, okay, we want to hard fork in half a year, then you just pick the 25 EIPs that are ready at the fork time. So instead of picking the EIPs and saying that the fork will contain these EIPs, rather we say that the fork will contain everything that's ready.
Yeah, so with this model, it makes it possible to do exactly what you say, Hudson, to do one hard fork for every EIP. And I personally think that it's not too bad, but that's only an option. We can do it like Peter says also. The proposal doesn't mandate either way.
So from a perspective of a non-maintainer of a client and people who wants to propose the IPs, I really like the model because it allow you to apply anytime and start working on it and say, okay, making progress, and now I'm in queue to get accepted. Whereas today, it's more like, oh, there's this deadline and I need to get everything ready before it. And I think it's a much better model from advance incentive for people to propose the IPs. It's easier to understand when you need to come apply and present project.
That sounds great. Oh, go ahead, Adrian.
Sorry. One of the challenges we've seen with the IPs in general is that they don't get a lot of scrutiny until it's in a hard fork and about to go live, and then all of a sudden people pay attention to it. I think there's value in this, and maybe we need to make it very clear that that accepted step is the time that no. Once we reach accepted, or whatever the particular wording is for that status, that it will go into a release at some point. It's just a matter of when now, and that might be enough to focus it. But that, I think, is the element we need to watch. Of don't get a glut of EIPs that haven't been looked at, that all of a sudden, because a hard fork's kind of starting to be scheduled, get a lot of attention and go back into tentative.
I think another risk we potentially run is that because it's EIP, single EIP focused, that means all the tests are focused on just that EIP, which means that if we bundle them together at the last minute into the next release, then we haven't done any cross-testing between the EIPs necessarily until right at the moment that we decide to package them all in. So just something we have to think about as we shift.
Just to address that a little bit. So if we have state tests for all the EIP, and then define the fork with the EIPs that we want to roll out, then we can always generate state tests, blockchain tests, which will cover them, at least implicit implicitly everything, but maybe not, explicit, possible explicit stuff that affects each other.
Well, something that I think would be good to note is that currently the EIPs wouldn't have gone through all of the checks that would have been proposed system, because the client implementers would have had to say, testing teams would also have to say, yes, there's testing, and
Hey, James, you're cutting out a lot. You might just type what you want to put. Okay, so James is going to type. Axic, you had something to say, and I believe your mic is working, as long as you unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. Sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to say that the EIP process was supposed to be similar when the last call feature was introduced. At the end of the last call for a core EIP, it would go into an accepted state, or there was an attempt to rename that to ready. But basically, that would be the state where it will be considered for implementation in clients, and then it could be considered for adoption in a hard fork. So basically, the process should be already similar, but nobody enforced this at all. But the issue people face when they propose an EIP, and I don't see that this proposal would address that in any form yet, is that how to capture the attention of the core devs earlier in the process.
Yes.
Because Martin's proposal has a stage where the core devs bless a proposal, aka tell the proposer that it's worthwhile to work on it, but that should be early enough. I guess it's not well defined yet in what stage that would happen.
So actually, I have an answer to that. So I think the problem with EAPs is that not everyone monitors the EAP, the EAPs basically. And when there's a last call, not everyone pays attention because it's not really mandatory for us to do that, and we have a lot of other things to do. For this, the first acceptance, something I wrote there is that the client developers express that yes, if this, we will accept a PR for this. That means that in order to get that blessing, there needs to be someone from Parity and someone from Geth and other clients that actually say yes, we are not going to reject this if it makes it into a PR. And if none of these people are present at the meeting where we talk about this, then the blessing cannot be given. So in that case, people will have to make something of a commitment that they are going to accept it.
So one of the things the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance does during their regular calls is they'll list out the names of the EIPs that are in final call. There's no discussion about it. It's just a simple, here's what we're discussing, here's what's in final call. And if we could add that into this meeting, like at the top of the meeting or the bottom of the meeting, that might help visibility among the all-core devs for the EIPs that do go into final call.
Yeah, but and I guess another difference is that a final call, if there's a final call and nobody does anything, then it just progresses. In this case, the final call means that everyone needs to accept it and give their blessing. So inaction means that it's stalled or blocked. And that's
so the blessed status is much later in the process than I anticipated. Because I see that a lot of, well, you mentioned that the blessing has to be given by multiple representatives from different clients.
Yes, on an all core dev meeting.
Yeah, but the issue I'm seeing, and I might be wrong, is that a lot of people come up with EIP ideas, but they fail to engage with any core devs to get some feedback on that idea. And they're not really encouraged to fully develop the EIP and maybe do some tests and any kind of implementation before getting any kind of feedback, whether this is a really bad idea or this is something worthwhile to look at.
Yeah, I have no solution to that.
So one thing that that usually essentially is my problem, my personal issue with the whole EIP process, is that it's essentially the whole process is untrackable from my perspective, personal perspective. Maybe it's a problem with me, but so what I see is that we have this. So on the EIP repo, we have hundreds of open EIPs. Some of them are just ideas. Some of them are well developed. Some of them have even been proposed but not discussed for 2 months. And my main issue is that, for example, if I, let's say, skip 2 core dev calls because I couldn't attend, then I will have absolutely no idea of what EIP in what state is. So maybe one thing that would really help, if we could have some visual representation of the progress that each EIP is having, so that you know that okay, there are these 4 EIPs that were proposed. Maybe one of them was proposed 1 month ago, the other one was proposed yesterday. But these 4 EIPs are in a particular state where you as a client dev should take a look, or maybe in a state where Dimitri as a tester should take a look, or etc. So if we could have some visual list of that's constantly updating, that maybe that would help. Otherwise, it's really hard to know even which EIPs to take a look at.
I think the reason that is non-existent is we practically only have a single state called draft. And then we have this accepted state, which would be after last call, but it's not really used for core EIPs. And if you want more steps and visual feedback on that, you would need to introduce multiple stages for core EIPs and define what those stages are and define how to enforce those stages.
I'm not sure you want to go into such a formal thing, so yeah, I don't know. I'll think about it. It doesn't make sense to discuss it now, but I'll try to figure out something that would work for me, and then maybe you guys can give your opinions on it.
I tried to do this and bold and trying to just track what everything was going on, and there didn't need to be any edit stand. You just check that certain things had happened without having to formally put it into the repository. Was spending most of my time just trying to follow it. So I definitely agree with Peter on that.
I think if we create a checklist for the EIP champions for what exactly they need to achieve for the accepted state, then that checklist can also be used by us as a dashboard for the progress for the clients. So if that checklist contains things like define spec, define tests, confirm with Dimitri and test team on availability of the reference test, have 2 major client implementations to implement the EIP, and get the acceptance for the inclusion in the next hard fork. And this checklist will be easy to follow for the champions, and they will have the feeling that they know exactly what to do, which is great when we see what Louis did for the 2028. Like he followed with all of us to get the full understanding of what we need for the EP to be introduced to the hard fork, and he followed up on that checklist. It'll be great for others to have the same understanding of the process, and then we can use exactly the same thing to just display a list of all EAPs and see how far they are in achieving this result.
Yeah,
And this isn't something we have to fully decide on today. Oh, Alex, did you have something else? Or
Um,
Peter?
I just have one last suggestion that I wonder if it would be possible to maybe have like one or two EIPs taken up on all core devs, fresh EIPs, and people would need to read the abstract and make a decision whether it makes any sense to for the champion to work on that EIP, just to give an early indication to the champion that this is worthwhile. And this could be the very first step for an EIP.
That sounds reasonable to me personally. Because if I'm an EIP writer, I want some kind of indication, which, I mean, that step one is that indication to an extent that things should go forward, but I think elaborating on that a little more would help people understand what a green light actually means. So, and that might be in Martin's full write up. I'll need to reread it. So, yeah, it sounds like we have more or less broad support for this with potentially a little bit of tweaking. So, it sounds like Peter and Alex might discuss this more. And Peter, you said you were going to ideate on this a little more.
yeah. So one more issue that I generally have with the whole EIP process, maybe we won't solve it, but at least I can tell you guys, is that so one of the issues that bothers me, it's really hard to follow the discussions and the progress. So generally, I know that on Thursday or on Wednesday, I don't know which day, I started implementing the net S store update, and I know that I personally posted at least 10 comments on the GitHub, yeah, on the EIP pull request, and those were quite beefy updates and variations. And I went back and forth, had ideas, and then went back on those ideas. And essentially, everyone is doing that, and obviously, that's how EIPs evolve. But I think this is kind of a problem, because then somebody else comes along, and then there's this huge discussion, and then you would need to read all the discussions and go understand every single rationale from every people, and only essentially, unless you read everything, you won't know what the discussions ended up being. And I don't know, maybe we should somehow figure out a way so that we can support discussions, but after some result was obtained via those discussions, somehow move those results back into a more condensed form, so that other client implementers don't have to read the entire thread just to figure out what the end result was. For example, in the NetStore case, I think the result of the whole discussion was that Alexei's idea has certain limitations, and then it's not the best choice. But you kind of need to read everything to understand that, and that's an issue.
I think there is a feature in Ethereum Magicians because they're using something. What's the form they're using? What's the software? It's called. Oh, I can't remember.
Discord.
But I thought it had Discord. Yeah, I thought it had a feature where you could see a summary of like what people have been saying, and I don't know if that feature's turned off because I'm looking now and I can't find it. But I thought that was a really cool feature if we had that enabled there. So I'm going to ask about that from Jamie, who I think is one of the people who runs it, um, and see if that could be part of the solution. Or alternatively, we could have someone like the hard fork coordinator dedicated to writing post every once in a while that sums up the previous 80 posts or something like that. Like this person talked to this person and this was the result of that. And so this objection has been dealt with and stuff like that.
Well, either that, or maybe if you put that on the release coordinator, it's a bit of a big burden. But maybe we could also put it on the EIP champion, so that
Yes, that'd be a good idea.
Beside the EIP, you would have also a list, a change log, and then essentially just say that, okay, since the last 1 week or 2 weeks, there was some discussions, maybe a few links here and there, and then just summarize it that where are we at currently. So just to try to cut through all the craft and just get to the point of the discussions.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds good to me. Any other comments on this for now? A few people are going to ideate on this more, maybe tweak it, and we can update the graphic a little more as we do that.
I'd say it'd be great if people got better at updating the EIP to reflect any agreed changes as well, like really quickly. Sometimes it happens, but sometimes the EIP is a long way behind the consensus on what should happen.
Yep, I agree. Okay, next up we have hard fork naming. So that's something that Axic brought up on an Ethereum Magicians thread and posted a comment in the agenda if people want to read along while he gives an overview of that. So go right ahead, Axic. Oh, and you're muted. There you go.
There's actually an older discussion going back a couple of months. The reason I brought it up now is that last week or the week before that, there was a suggestion to split this and into part one and part two, and I felt that might be confusing. And practically, we are discussing two different hard forks at the moment, and maybe maybe we should just name the second hard fork something other than Istanbul Part Two. And that's why I went back to this old discussion thread going back to April, where there were a couple of different proposals, and I proposed to use DEFCON city names because I felt that that wouldn't be contentious at all. It's a fixed set of names which have a pattern, and I give an explanation why I think that's a good idea. We won't run out of names anytime soon. I don't want to repeat that. People can read it on the comment.
Okay. So what are people thinking of that, those who've read it? I think that's an okay idea. I'll have to think about it more personally.
I think it's a good idea. I think people will have comments about the actual names, the color of the bike shed, but yeah, I just think it's good enough.
My takeaway from Arachnid and I had a long conversation on this was that it's a good idea.
So I'm going to be the Debbie Downer on this. Dimitri posted an EIP during the open EIP call where we recommended just numbers for the names. And I think we need to get a split between the public name that we do and the private name that we do, because writing in the code or writing in the tests, you got to keep a large mental map of what the order of the EIPs were when we did the Shanghai attack EIPs, where those fit in, what the city names were, and now we're gonna have to remember the order of the dev cons. My concern is that it makes the code that we're going to have to write in testing and in software, and that we're going to have to maintain in our Genesis files, a little hard to understand unless you are very deeply invested in knowing what's what, and it increases the mental burden. And I think public names are great. Give it these names like Berlin, London, Shanghai, and all those other fun names, because it makes great conversation in marketing, and when we're talking about things in public, let's give an identifiable name. But I would propose that when it comes down to the reference tests in our Genesis files, we just call it ETH9 and ETH10 and ETH11.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, but I think they're kind of separate because I think internally we're gonna have to have a reference map anyway, and it's super awesome if all clients can if you can configure any client to know that it's 01, 02, 03, but I still think we're gonna need to have the public names, and that's what I thought Axic's proposal was about, the public names, and I'm all for having numbered internally.
Yeah, I'm getting warmed up to the public names being the DevCon cities, but how many Okay, you already expanded that we won't run out of names anytime soon, so that's pretty cool. Um, and let's see. Okay, and then the numbering system that Dana was talking about, that sounds good. Is there like I've only worked in a true corporate professional software environment. Not to say this isn't professional, but like one that has like version number naming for certain major releases. Like I've only done that for a couple of years. So is there like a precedent for this in non-blockchain industries?
It's called semantic versioning, and it's going to devolve quickly down to a single incrementing number. The first number increments when there is a breaking backwards change, which is the very definition of a hard fork. The second one's a minor upgrade, which might correspond to Bitcoin's soft forks. And the third one is basically bug fixes. But since every upgrade we're doing is going to be a breaking backwards change, we're changing things that are going to change fundamental rules of the consensus. I think the easiest thing to do is just start from Olympic or Homestead, and every time that we upgraded a test net with intent of going to mainnet, we increment it by one, and that's where the number comes from. And it's just a simple count of how many times that we tried to hard fork.
Hassan, to answer your question, if you think of non-blockchain world, and I guess Microsoft Office will be very familiar for all of us, and it has numbering underneath, like 11, 12, I think the current version is 15 or something. So I think the company internally uses it for tracking, for simple comparison of versions, and they name the versions with years or just any marketing names outside.
So one issue that I do see with versions is that I know that at least certain testnets, as far as I know, Koban specifically, they applied hearts. So they have a few EIPs that they applied independent of mainnet, and that will be problematic, because if we say that, okay, I don't know, Istanbul is version 6, I just said a number, and then we define version 7 as whatever, and then one of the test nets introduces in between a fork to handle some scenario, and then their version 7 will be different from our version 7. And it's debatable that, okay, then it's the protocol version 7, but it's going to get things messy.
Ubuntu uses the year and month as their version. So like 12.16, 12.04 means it was on 2012 April. And that's been pretty easy to follow.
Yeah, but still, it's then configuring is setting. Then it's, yeah, I guess you could say that I want to apply Ethereum 19.4 at, I don't know. I think that I really like the value, the number approach. I'm just trying to figure out whether there will be some corner case which will backfire.
So what Koban could do is usually they would be doing their EIPs, but it'll be off of a particular main hard fork. So you could call theirs ETH6.1 or ETH6 Koban 1 to show that it's based off of this, but then it's their own split off of it. The downside is Koban won't be able to tell where the gaps are, where they're skipping forks, and where there should be good reason. But we're going to have to do that anyway, because we're skipping Constantinople for most of the mainnet to go straight to Constantinople fix.
Yeah, but I guess for mainnet, you could always say that you're going from version 5 to version 7. So that's that's kind of doable. But for example, if what happens if for Koban, Parity decides that they're going to ship all the EIPs for Ethereum version 7, but they're going to skip one of them. So they're going to ship almost all of the EIPs. Then you cannot really call it version 7 because it's not really all of it, but you're not going to add it anyway in later point in time either. So it gets a bit funky. And currently the way to do it is that you just say that, no, this is not the Istanbul fork, this is the, I don't know, Berlin fork, and boom, done. And then Koban doesn't have Istanbul fork. But if you just have version numbers, then those will start to clash across networks.
So that's why I've always proposed it with ETH01, ETH02, ETH03. So if Koban wants to start their own thing, they start Koban 05, Koban 06, and they could just map those to hard fork numbers.
Well, yeah, but then it's, if, for example, if I want to start a private network, then things get funky again. So for a private network, do I want to apply Kovan 05 or ETH 05? Anywho, that's I didn't want to derail this discussion. I'm just saying that there's a funky corner case here.
Well, let's discuss it
Yeah,
on
well,
all
that.
core devs.
What was that?
I say we can take it offline for all core devs and later come back to that if we have some specific ideas.
That sounds good to me.
I guess nobody minded in a way Alex's proposal, so, right?
Oh yeah, specifically, so the non-numbering one, I'm totally cool with the naming of them for cities, me personally. Is anyone against that?
I support it.
It's okay.
I support it.
Okay, let's go ahead with that for... Would that start with Istanbul too then? Would that be Berlin?
It will be London, I think.
Yeah, London or Berlin.
No, Berlin. Yeah, it will be Berlin.
Yep. Berlin was the first EIP 0, or DevCon 0. Yeah, so it'll be... Let me see if I can do my history right. Berlin, London, Shanghai, Cancun, Prague, and where is it this year?
Osaka.
Osaka. Yep. Okay.
But you guys are aware that if we ever do another DevCon in London, we're screwed.
London too.
Oh yeah.
Pick a suburb.
Yeah, we could do something like that, or
Manchester.
just have it.
You can call it Brexit then.
DevCon Brexit. Okay. So what's next on the agenda? We only have 5 minutes left. Are there any client updates or anything anyone else wants to talk about before we go into just the previous decisions made, just in case there's anything hanging out there? Okay, so the last time, here's some of the decisions we made. Decision 67.1 was that EIP 633, 1380, 1985, 2045, and 2046 are tentatively accepted and will require benchmarks. We've already talked through that today. EIP 13, this is decision
No,
6.
So this is the second part of the confusion. These are
Oh,
slated for
yeah.
Berlin hard fork.
Okay, yeah, so we actually didn't do that. We're putting that off until we finish up Istanbul. Okay, so then decision 67.2, EIP 1352 and 1803 out of Istanbul due to lack of championing.
Well, they're out of Berlin.
Yeah, so they'll be out of Istanbul, so they'll be in Berlin potentially.
That's why I'm saying that they were decided to be out of Berlin.
Oh, so they're out of all hard forks.
As far as I understood, yes.
Okay. Decision 67.3, all the gas cost EIPs are moving into tentatively accepted, still would require benchmarking to be considered on a hard fork.
Again, Berlin.
We dealt with that today,
What?
I think, and that's Berlin.
But aren't we including one of the the repricing for one of the ECML stuff?
Yeah, but so these were all all the decisions are about Istanbul too, and they essentially about these EIPs. So I created if you look at the gas issue tracker for Istanbul, I have a list of issues for the second part of Istanbul. As far as I know, all these discussions are talking about the Berlin parts.
Yeah, no, I was talking about we do have 1108 reduce all P and pre-compiled gas costs.
Yeah, we do have a few of those, yes.
Yeah, so the decision all the gas cost EAPs, I guess didn't cover that one.
No, so I think what this decision wanted to say is that all the EIPs that were discussed that relate to gas cost and that were hanging in the air, they have been moved to tentatively accepted.
Yeah.
So they didn't want to downgrade already accepted EIPs, rather upgrade hanging ones. But again, these are about the Berlin fork.
Yeah, so that doesn't need to be addressed today or maybe even next meeting. Let's see, EIP 1559 stays withdrawn is decision 67.4. 67.5 used retest eth to generate reference tests for all tentatively accepted and accepted EIPs. We already talked about that. And then finally, decision 67.6, the next all core dev meeting, to be last call for something to go from tentatively accepted to accepted to be included in the October fork. That was also completed. Action item was to get a status update from both Geth and Parity before the next call. I think that happened because they commented on the agenda and on different ones. So yeah, that's all of the action items from before. I don't know if anyone has any more information on this, but there was the ETH1X finality gadget working group got restarted they had their first call earlier, and I think that was Alex Stokes doing it. I think they either got some funding or someone just stepped up. And does anyone have any information on that? I haven't followed it.
Yeah, I was on the call. There was mostly an organizing meeting to try and figure out how we want to go forward and what wants to go on with that. And there was a little bit of discussion about, whether it's going to be a soft fork where the clients are going to implement a full beacon chain client, or if there is going to be some sort of RPC mechanism back and forth to the clients, or there was a brief discussion about whether there should be some sort of a witness put on the chain or not. That's still controversial because of latency. One thing that I think is relevant to all core devs is they were concerned about the timing of the hard forks in case they needed to do hard forks for these. And I think they were still operating on the 9-month fixed cadence schedule. And I let them know that we were going to discuss Martin's pool idea and pointed out that what we're doing with ProdPow, that for big important ones like the finality gadget would be big and important, that we're going to go ahead and fork when needed. So whether or not we stick with the cadence, something big and important can get a fork as needed. So I think that's probably one thing that impacts us the most, is that the pooling model that Mark proposed is really going to help with these big tentpole type changes.
Okay, great. Thanks for the overview. That's it. Does anyone have anything else? I think we got through pretty much the entire agenda. All right, we're going to see everyone in 1 week. What's the time going to be, James? Do you happen to know off the top of your head? Because I'm really bad at figuring out what we moved
that
back.
would be the 23rd of August at 2 p.m. UTC, if you follow the normal rotation.
23rd, 2 p.m. UTC. Okay, so that's like what we had for the longest time. The normal, quote, normal date and time that we had before we switched over, right?
Yeah.
Lovely.
And is the plan then 2 weeks after that for the one after? Do we just...
I guess it'll depend on what we talk about on the 23rd. If there's not a need to have one on the 30th, then we won't.
Okay. I'll update calendar just to move the next one, and then we'll work it out from there.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining. We will talk to you in a week. Goodbye.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.